All right, we are live, heathens. How is everybody doing today? Today we have a conversation between me, Steve McRae, Iseth, Ozzy, Paulogia, Godless Cranium, and I think we may get Holy Koolaid here in a little bit if he can check his Twitter messages and whatnot. But today we're talking about temporal atheism. And so I'm going to work on
Temporal
trying to get
agnosticism,
yeah.
Yeah, temporal agnosticism. Sorry, God. I'm gonna work on trying to get people's YouTube links in there for everybody to go and check out. But Steve, could you kind of explain what temporal agnosticism is?
Sure. Basically, temporal agnosticism is the position that it's not that we can't know whether God exists or not. It's just that at the present time, I don't believe that anybody knows whether God exists or not. It's the sort of middle ground between theism and atheism. It's the position that doesn't accept theism. It doesn't accept atheism.
Okay.
It
Well,
lacks, I guess, in both positions, right? It says, I'm not accepting what the atheist says as far as a claim that they believe God does not exist from a philosophical atheist point of view. And I don't accept the theist position that they believe God does not exist.
Okay, well, my response to that would be that agnosticism is a knowledge claim, while theism or atheism is a belief claim. So, I mean, you can totally be an agnostic atheist.
You can. So some versions. Huh? There's a way to do a modifier for atheism. There's a way to say, okay, look it. I'm going to attach this epistemic modifier that I'm saying I am an atheist. I believe God does not exist, but I do not know God does not exist, right? That would be the agnostic atheist, right? But generally speaking, the way I look at it is that the atheist is a dostastic claim to begin with. An atheist is not asserting any knowledge claim at all, just by saying they're atheist. So it's kind of superfluous to say I'm agnostic atheist because it's already just a dostastic claim. Now, it's fine to do so. And I want people to understand that the only reason I bring this to people's attention is because as an agnostic, I'm finding that more militant atheists, none of you obviously guys here, but more militant atheists try to take that position away and say, look, Steve, you got to be either theist or atheist. There's no other choice. And in philosophy, there is another choice. There's other ways you can take some of these definitions, like instead of just being a lack of belief, which is a very broad definition, is based on Anthony Fleur's presumption of atheism, or you could take the very narrow position, which is more the philosophical definition that it is an assertion. It's the belief that God does not exist. And when people tell me, well, Steve, you can't just be a pure agnostic. It doesn't exist. And I even show them, look, I hear some logic of why it can exist. It is a perfectly acceptable position. That's not theist. It's not atheist. And it's just that I find that when they're telling me that I can't hold the theological position I have, it's no different than saying when a theist says to an atheist, like they say, Godless engineer, in your heart, God exists because the Bible tells me so. You look at them like they're crazy, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, because they're telling you what your theological position is. And you're like, no, that's not my theological position. I'm not a theist. I'm an atheist. Well, no, you according to my definitions, my version of the Bible that I read, you're a theist. Well, that's what I see kind of happening with me when they kind of tell me you can't just be an agnostic. Does that make sense? And by the way, I want to thank you, by the way, for hosting this. I didn't get a chance to. I'm sorry. Mea culpa.
Oh no, yeah, no. I love having these kind of conversations, so it's no big deal. But I mean, to me, as far as somebody asking somebody, if they're a theist or an atheist, I mean, it does kind of seem to be black and white. Because I mean, like, if I were to ask you, like, do you believe in a God? What would you say?
I would say I have no God belief.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, well, no, you should call yourself an atheist. But I mean, if I were to talk about somebody that doesn't believe in a God or has no God belief, I would say that they are an atheist.
Right. According to your definition, right?
Yeah, but
my
basically
definition
what you're
of
doing is you're telling them, okay, now you have definition A and I have definition B, and because you're using definition A, you're telling me that I'm thinking the way you're telling me what I'm supposed to think, and according to your definition, it'll actually be accurate. But according to my definition, it's totally not accurate because my definition is different, and because of my definition, I can totally call myself an agnostic. So basically, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, now you're using blue for this color, and I'm using red for this color. I don't particularly care how much I am blue in your, worldview. I use red, therefore I am red. It's kind of like that. You're making a bit of a word game there.
Well, and that's the last thing. This should not be a definitional discussion, right? I mean, and by the way, I want anybody that's ever going to watch this and watching the live feed, thank you all for showing up. This is not anything like an argument. This is actually a great discussion. I think it's very good that we can have these types of discussions. And it's not a definitional game, right? It's not a definition of who has the better definition. I believe very strongly there's no such thing as intrinsic meanings to things. I believe that there's no specific definition that we have to use, right? There's just more useful and less useful kind of thing.
Right, but, Steve, but you say that, but at the same time you describe. So I think the very first thing, I don't think the labels are useful at all, because everyone defines atheist. Theist tends to have some agreement, but atheist and non-theist and lack-theist and all those things tend to have very fuzzy definitions. But so therefore I usually start with, what do you believe about God? Just as GE just did. He said, do you have a God belief? And you said no. And so I'm able to say, well, I call that an atheist. And
I call that agnosticism.
Right. But so, no, but you don't. Okay, you do. You call that agnosticism, but if I said, well, what if we agreed on a term called non-theist? Would you call yourself a non-theist?
Yes.
Okay, so you're an agnostic non-theist, right?
All agnostics are non-theist. If you're not a theist, right? Anybody who believes in God is a theist. I think everybody would agree upon that, correct?
I don't think you can actually say that. I think that there are a lot of people who say, okay, listen, I believe that there is a God, but I am not sure 100%. I believe it because I feel it, but I'm perfectly aware that that's just my emotions, and I agree that other people cannot see it that way, and therefore I am not stating that I know that he exists. I feel that he exists, and therefore this is my belief. It is not my knowledge. I think it's very, very possible to have an agnostic theist.
That I don't think describes agnosticism, no. I mean, I'm an atheist. I think gods don't exist, but I would never go so far as to say that I know, can prove, or can demonstrate that no God exists, right? I am of the view that all gods are nonsense. They're all made up. They're all fictions. They're all imaginary. They're all unreal. Okay? I can't prove that. I think I have reasons for thinking that those propositions that I just uttered are true, but I don't claim to know it. Now, am I an agnostic? No, I'm an atheist, right? An atheist is someone, traditionally has been understood as someone who thinks that gods don't exist. In fact, and this is a kind of funny thing, you will hear people like Aaron Ra say that atheism is the mere lack of belief in any god or gods. And so he would include himself under that belief, because he lacks a belief in any god or gods, as do I. But in addition to that, he also thinks, as I do, that gods are all fictions. They're all made up. They're all human inventions. They're all products of our imaginations, right? Now, all of those claims, though, that gods are made up, they're inventions, they're not real, every one of those implies that gods don't make up part of reality, that gods are not included within that which is real, right? It's saying that gods aren't real. That's a claim about reality. Okay, that is a positive assertion. That's not, now you can make a positive assertion without being certain about something, right? So someone like Aaron Ra and myself, we are both atheists, and the word that used to be used for that was the strong atheist position, the person who affirms that there isn't a God. But you can affirm that something doesn't exist without knowing or being able to prove that something doesn't exist. I believe Bigfoot is nonsense, that there's no such critter. Never has been, and there isn't now, okay? I can't prove to a certainty. I don't know for a fact that Bigfoots don't exist, that the Canadian woods don't have a couple of these specimens running around. Okay, I can't demonstrate that. But I am very, very strongly convinced that Bigfoot doesn't exist. Now, does the fact that I don't purport to be certain mean that I'm not atheistic, that I'm not denying the existence of Bigfoot? I am absolutely denying the existence of Bigfoot. So you can deny the existence of something without claiming to be certain about it. And this is the mirror image of theism. A theist is someone who believes there is a God. Not all theists go around claiming to be certain that there's a God. So the terms theism, atheism, and agnosticism have long been understood within the history of ideas, within the philosophy of religion, within theology especially, but even within vernacular usage, these terms have always been understood to be terms about what people believe to be the case. A theist has always been understood to be someone who thinks there's a God, at least one. An atheist is someone who thinks there aren't any gods. And an agnostic is someone who is not convinced that either one of those positions is defensible, right? That is, they would not assert either one, right? So an agnostic is a non-theist and a non-atheist, right? So agnostics are non-theists just as much as I, an atheist, am a non-theist, right? But an agnostic is also a non-theist. They don't believe that there's a God. They don't believe that there isn't a God, right? They're undecided, right? And so it's not a question of not knowing something, right? When you ask an agnostic, what do you believe? And they say, well, I don't know if there's a God. They're not saying they're uncertain about it. What they're saying is they're undecided, right? The expressions, I don't know in English, or je ne sais pas in French and things like that, and other cognate languages. Those words, I don't know, don't always refer to something doxastic. They don't refer to one's degree of confidence, okay? They have nothing to do with knowledge sometimes, right? So if you say, hey, Ozzy, do you want to, what do you want for dinner tonight? Do you want to go out for Chinese, or do you want to go out for sushi, or do you want to go out for Italian? And I say, oh, I don't know. Now, I'm not saying, oh, I lack a justified true belief and a firm conviction. No, what I'm saying is I'm undecided. I have not made up my mind. And so an agnostic is, when they say, I don't know, all they're saying is, I have not made up my mind. Either because, given the present state of the evidence, I can't conclude one way or the other, or, given what I understand about the concept of God and the state of the evidence, the question is undecidable in principle. And so the reason I don't take a side right now is that it will never be rational to take a side, because maybe the concept is too hazy, or the evidence can never be adduced that would be sufficient to warrant the affirmation that a God exists, or the affirmation that a God doesn't exist. So agnosticism is a state of belief. That is, it is the state of not believing specifically either of the other two propositions. And that's how, and if you look up how agnosticism has been traditionally used, that's exactly how it is, people use it. And that's why agnostics, when you tell them, well, look, do you believe in God? And they go, no, I don't. And they go, oh, well, then you're an atheist. What they're saying, the reason they get their back up, the reason it raises their hackles, is they're saying, listen, I have considered the idea of there being a God, and I've considered the proposition that there isn't a God. And I got to tell you, I don't find either one of those convincing enough. I don't find the evidence and reasons sufficient to affirm either one of those. If I wanted to call myself an atheist, I'd call myself an atheist. So the point is that someone like Steve doesn't view the proposition God doesn't exist the way I do. We're not in the same position. We're both non-theists, but to lump us under the heading of atheist is to actually muddy the waters and to make it sound like we have the same belief. We don't have anything like the same belief. And the qualifier agnostic atheist, it doesn't do any help. You're either a strong atheist or a weak atheist. You are firmly convinced that atheism is true, or you're not. And that's it.
No, I would disagree. Well, I mean, I disagree with the entire thing, because I mean, agnostic, gnostic, those are knowledge claims. I mean, that's
they're not.
To say that they are different is to say that you're going to throw out the existing definitions and use your own definition. If we're going to do that, then I can define snuffleupagus to mean that I know that the pink elephant exists, or something like that. Like I can redefine like anything to mean anything, and then at that point, what is the use of like a common language? What are words at that point?
Godless engineer, you're the one that is using the newfangled definitions that we hear put forward by atheist activists online, right? This idea of an agnostic atheist and an agnostic theist, or a gnostic atheist and a gnostic theist, these are newfangled definitions. The word agnostic was coined by Thomas Henry Huxley in the 1850s or so. And he coined it not to describe people, atheists who are uncertain about whether or not there's no God, right? Or who aren't prepared to assert with full confidence that there's no God. He coined it to refer to those people who assent to neither of the propositions. I mean, there are, broadly speaking, two kinds of agnostic positions. There are those you can call fence-sitter agnostics. Those are people who either consider the arguments pro and con or not, and have come to the conclusion, at least provisionally, I can't make up my mind. I'm undecided on this question. And so I'm not going to assent to either one because I can't make up my mind. Okay? And then there are Huxleyan types of agnostics. You're shaking your head, but I mean, this is something I sort of earned a living at, and you can look up these definitions, right?
Well, no, I'm looking at the definition of Gnostic right now, and it comes from the Greek for known. It's about knowledge. Like like Gnostic has always been about knowledge since
the word.
century.
Okay, yeah, okay. Look, the word gnosis is the Greek word gnosis. Okay, it was used in antiquity, and it referred specifically to revealed knowledge. Like, you know, the Gnostics, the ancient, you know, the Gnostic Christians, for instance, right? Those were people who believed that they had sacred wisdom, revealed wisdom. Okay, it was nothing like something like a justified true belief or a warranted belief. Okay, this was divinely
it's not about belief at all.
Instilled. Well, I'm telling you where the word comes from. You're trying to use an etymological argument, and what I'm trying to do is say that etymological argument is in fact incorrect. Okay, so and the word agnosticism.
Just to be clear. Well, just to be clear, I was bringing up the origin of the word because you had previously brought up how it was originally brought up what did you say, like 18th century or something like that. So, I mean, that's the only reason why I was bringing that up.
I was bringing up the word agnosticism because agnosticism is a newfangled word. It was newfangled in the 1850s. Before that, we didn't have that word. Okay, but Huxley introduced the word to refer to people who were undecided on the question of God's existence. Okay, and it referred, it was meant to exclude both theists and atheists, but those people who are on the fence. And you can be on the fence for two reasons. You can either say, well, provisionally, given the state of the evidence, I can't decide, but the question is decidable, I just can't decide it, maybe someday we'll have the evidence. And then there are what are called Huxleyan agnostics, because Huxley in some of his moods, so at least some of his writings made it seem like he thought that the question was unanswerable. No one would ever be in a position to answer whether or not a transcendental being existed, and consequently, and no one could ever disprove the proposition, and consequently, no one would ever be in a position to affirm or deny that position rationally. And so the question was undecidable. That's the Huxleyan agnostic. Okay. So the point is this: that the term agnostic was never invented, was not coined as a qualifier for some kind of theism or some kind of atheism. That is something that online atheist activists have introduced. It's fairly recent. Now, I don't have an objection in principle to people using that definition. You can describe me as an agnostic atheist if you want, because I'm not prepared to say I can demonstrate that no gods exist, right? But then I have to say that the term Gnostic atheist refers to virtually nobody, because virtually nobody is so stupid as to say I can prove that any and all gods don't exist. I mean, there'd be a few people out there who would venture to make that claim, but I would submit that they haven't considered enough of the arguments or are not familiar with enough theological claims to be able to substantiate.
Yeah, but just because you discard the fact that they believe it that way or they think that way, you know, if they say I know there is no God and I know and I think I can prove it, you know, if that's their position, you know, you can say it's stupid as much as you want, but that doesn't change the fact that it's their position. Like, you kind of basically do exactly the same thing as you do with the whole agnostic thing, where it's like, yeah, no, you have to take this position. And I also don't really get this whole agnostic part, because, like, at the end of the day, when you live your life, you have to live your life on an assumption. You have to assume either A, life is in a manner A, or B, life is in a manner B. I mean, I understand this whole theological nonsense and this whole philosophical nonsense, but at the end of the day, on a practical level, you have to live your life on the assumption that A, your house will collapse, or B, your house will not collapse. And if you live on the assumption that B, your house will not collapse, then for practical purposes, you cannot say that you are in between A and B completely 100% in the middle. It just doesn't work. work.
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean? What's wrong with being in the middle exactly? Let me give you an example. Let me give you a counter example to that. Okay. Supposing that I put a jar of jelly beans in front of you, and I say that there's obviously a finite number of jelly beans in here, and you don't know how many. And let's say there's like this very large jar of jelly beans. Okay. So you don't know how many there are, and I don't know how many there are. And I say, okay, well look, the number is either going to be an even number or an odd number. There's no middle ground here, right? It's a positive integer. It's going to be even or odd. What are you? Are you an evenist or an oddist? The only rational position in such a situation is to say, I'm undecided. I have nothing to go on in this particular.
But then again, it's a practical thing. Like you have to guess. You know, they say, okay, you have to guess.
No, you don't. No, you don't. That's precisely what you don't have to do. No, wait, that's precisely what you don't have to do.
Let me finish my point just a second. You know, you can see the jar and see like, okay, I'm undecided. But there is, this is a game. It's a guess game. It's a guess game. If you guess it right, you get a candy. If you don't guess it right, you don't get a candy. So you have this jar in front of you, and you can say like, I'm just not participating in the bloody game. I just don't, I abstain from playing the game. But if you play the game, if you join in and you're like, okay, now what do I do? Do I guess that they're even or do I guess that they're odd? Then for practical purposes, you have to switch to one or the other. Whether you're convinced about it or not, whether you know it or not, that doesn't change the fact that you have to switch to one side.
It's whether you believe it or not. Look, you can put a gun to my head and say, Ozzy, choose even or odd, or I'm going to blow your head out of your ear, your brains out of your ear, and that'll be the end of it. Choose. I'll choose. Maybe I'll flip a coin, or maybe I'll just, choose odd because I like the letter O more than I like the letter E. I could have any ridiculous reason. Okay. Of course, I can make a choice one way or another, a pragmatic choice for considerations other than epistemic ones, for reasons having nothing to do with what I believe. And I think that's what happens all the time. There are a lot of people out there who are neither theists nor atheists. They go about living their lives, but how they go about living their lives does not tell you what they actually think is true about the proposition. There are a lot of people walking around who are agnostic, who are worried about whether there's a God. It affects their lives, right? They're on the fence, and it's anxiety producing. And you say, oh, it doesn't, if it doesn't make a difference, they don't live like atheists. Those people go to sleep worried at night, okay? I am not kept up at night worried about the possibility that there's a God. I think the possibility that God exists is so remote as to not be worth worrying about, and part of what makes me an atheist, right? Whereas an agnostic is on the fence. Such a person ruminates a lot more and thinks that the question is more relevant to his or her life than it would to mine, right? So they don't live exactly like an atheist. So pragmatically, they don't live the same way. And even if they had to just choose a way to live, that would be no different than a person putting a gun to my head and saying, choose even or odd. That would tell you nothing. That you could not infer that, oh, well, in my heart of hearts, I really think it's odd because I said odd. No. And so that's what I think is a mistake in here. It's a mistake to subsume an agnostic under the heading of atheist just because they're a non-theist, because the whole point of the term agnostic, the reason it was coined in the first instance, and the way it's used by millions and millions of people across the world in modern languages, is to distinguish themselves from atheists and theists. An agnostic is someone who is both a non-atheist and a non-theist. That's why they get annoyed. That's why, ask yourself, why do agnostics get so irritated when you call them atheists? It would be exactly the same if a theist walked up to an agnostic and said, hey, Steve, you're an agnostic. Do you believe that God doesn't exist? And Steve would say, well, no, I'm an agnostic. I don't believe that God doesn't exist. Oh, well, I'm going to define theism as the mere lack of belief in the non-existence of God. There, poof, I've just subsumed you under theism, right? You can always drag people under some umbrella or other by broadening the scope of your definition to include the people who are undecided and on the fence, right? I can turn anyone into an evenist or an oddist, right? I can say, do you believe it's even or odd? And you go, well, I'm undecided, Ozzy. And I'll say, oh, well, then you're not an oddist. That makes you an evenist. That would be fallacious argument.
Okay. But then you could just say, you could just ask them, what percentage do they believe Like, are you more on the side of not believing, or are you more on the side of believing, right? Most people aren't 50-50. I mean, I don't.
Right.
Steve and I
That's
already
true.
had this conversation via Twitter, right? Like,
great conversation we had, by the way.
Yeah, and most people are like 50. You know, even if you're 51-49, then you're probably you're going to lean towards one side or the other. Right? Yeah, I'm more. I believe that there's no God, or I believe that there is, right? So to be a pure agnostic would be like a 50-50 thing. I guess that's possible, like I said to Steve.
Well, look,
but I mean, it's not realistic.
I don't think that's a good objection, but Steve wants to get in.
Yeah, I do want to. Well, here's the way I'm looking at it. And I think Ozzy, is made a good point. I do think about these things when I formulate my position. People that know me, I mean, they've been around for quite some time. I don't think about things arbitrarily. I don't take beliefs lightly. I want to know that my beliefs, I have a justification for why I believe the way I do, right? I want to know that my beliefs comport with reality. I don't want to have false beliefs. I don't want to accept something just because it's easy to do, to fit into the norm of what people think. I don't want to be a person that says, oh, you know what? I love all of my atheist friends. I want to be an atheist. If I don't accept the proposition, I want to be true to myself, right? So I believe that you have to have justification for what you believe. Now, with the whole jar thing, I can't justify an even position. I can't justify an odd position because I have no knowledge either way. Now, you make a great point, by the way, 50-50. I don't think you can be 50-50. But some days I wake up, I might be, a little bit more to the theist side. I might have some good arguments of going, you know what? I've had some things in my life where, you know what? Maybe God exists. And then the next day I might be like, you know what? Yeah, you know what? I've heard some really great atheist arguments. I might be a little more atheist. There's a variance there from the central position, right? I've called a preumbra. There's a little bit to either side, and I think it changes a little bit. I don't think you're dead on, but that still is well within a middle parameter that doesn't sway you to atheism and doesn't sway you to theism.
Right, but Steve, you started this off by saying this is not an argument about definitions, and it 100% is. Everything we've talked about for the last half hour is 100% definitional arguments. So
how is it a definitional argument?
Well, because you are again you're resisting a particular definition of atheism, and I'm not saying you're wrong to do so, but you're resisting atheism as a lack of belief, for example.
For me or for other people?
For you, you are you're for you personally, you're saying, well, I don't like that definition, but that's Paul's definition. So so really, under Paul's definition, you are an atheist. So you're a lack of beliefist, right? You're a lack theist.
But here's the thing: you're what you think doesn't have any bearing on what my actual theological position is.
I understand, but how is it not? But how is it not definitional? It's like I really still think you have to walk up to someone and say, "Do you believe in a God?" And you say no. And do you believe there's no God? I think, I don't think these words anymore can be thrown out there, and that you can assume someone's position without those clarifying questions.
But that's what you're doing. What you're doing is you're moving me to the atheist position that I don't fall under.
But that's why I don't actually do that. That's why
this is all hypothetical, right?
Right.
I mean, you don't actually do that to me. I love you, but but what I'm saying is that there are people that do that, right? They do move into that side, right? And there's other. By the way, I'm speaking for a small group of agnostics that we know. I'm not going to name names, but there's more than just me, right? And
can I make a clarification as far as defining terms goes?
Yeah.
Let's say, you're talking about being an agnostic towards just some general God out there. You can't prove 100% that no God exists. But Steve, I don't think that you would approach, let's say, the god Zeus or the god of, Apollo or Ra, or, even the Christian God with that same level of, lack of knowledge. Most of those gods, you could say, yeah, there's aspects of them that we would expect to see, or there's things that we can disprove in the written records of those gods. The man-made aspects of them are clearly visible. So would you say that you're an agnostic towards those gods, or just towards the idea of a god in general? In general,
yeah, that's a great point. I mean, people again know that I am very much anti young earth creationism. I mean, I fight against it tooth and nail. I think it's the most blight thing on the earth because it's affecting their educational system.
So would you say that you're an atheist towards those gods?
It's atheistic, right? I don't believe that the young earth creationist God exists, but the atheism in general is a belief that no God exists of any kind, right? It's not a specific deity. And I think Ozzy.
Well, yes.
Something out here.
Well, yes. Atheism is a lack of belief in any gods existing at all.
That's one definition.
But,
that's the very broad colloquial definition, but the philosophical definition, and that's in academia, that's generally accepted, is the assertion that God does not exist, or it's the negation, or it's the position that ontologically speaking in the universe, no God exists.
No. Atheism has never been an assertion or a positive claim that gods don't exist. Like people nowadays say it as, God doesn't exist. Hold on, let me finish, guys. Let me finish.
Let's hear him out.
Talk for like 5 minutes. Okay? I calmly let you guys talk and go on for several minutes at a time. The least you can do is let me, finish my thought. Okay? Listen, atheism, okay, as it's defined, as we know it in our culture today, is not a positive claim that gods do not exist. It is a belief claim. It's like, I lack that belief, or I believe no gods exist. Like, that's what that's the colloquial meaning. Like, whenever an atheist says, "Oh, gods don't exist" or whatnot, they're talking about what they believe, not that they have that knowledge. That's why we have Gnosticism and agnosticism, because then that qualifies it with what we know. Because I believe I can be Gnostic about things like the Yahweh or Zeus or anything like that. I can be Gnostic about those gods and say, no, I know for sure that they don't exist, because the descriptors that we use in order to define what makes them do not match reality. So I can know. But like agnostic about God in general, I am totally that, because I don't know that a God doesn't exist. But I live my life in a way that shows that I don't believe in one. And so, I mean, I really think that the confusion that it gets down to is, whether or not somebody is a Gnostic atheist and they're still just, they're not qualifying it. I don't know. That's what it seems like to me.
Did someone want to go first? Because I've had a lot to say already.
You can go ahead, Ozzy. I'm pretty sure that what you want to say is
okay.
What I'm going
just
to
very
say.
quick, guys. I jump out. I have to jump into another hangout. It was very awesome.
Oh yeah,
Thanks,
thank you, Iseth.
Thanks, Ethan.
Awesome.
Nice talking to you.
Thanks, Iseth.
Yeah,
Thank you.
take care.
Godless, engineer, first of all, let me apologize for stepping on you. I absolutely flat out interrupted you when you were mid-sentence, and that was my bad. The earlier interruption, it turns out I was badly lagged. I was running behind. I had a process running I didn't realize. So again, that's my fault anyway, but not the same kind of mistake. But in any case, I apologize for stepping on you that way. That was rude. Just to explain my my impatience there, this is something that I encounter a lot, that atheism has never meant the positive affirmation that a God doesn't exist. And by positive affirmation, I don't mean that one is positive, but that one would dare assert that a God doesn't exist. And that is exactly what atheism is defined as traditionally, okay? Let me just read you a few, okay? I mean, you can go on and Google up atheism, and now you will find a flood of definitions that are very recent, promoted by American atheists and other atheist activist groups. But let me choose some sources here that are not ideologically motivated definitions put forward by activist groups, okay? Let's start with the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, okay? It's overwhelmingly, its contributors are overwhelmingly atheists, by the way. Here's the definition. Atheism means the negation of theism, the denial of the existence of God. Okay, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines atheism in two ways. One is A, the disbelief in the existence of God. And disbelief is ambiguous. That could be a mere lack, but normally when you say I disbelieve something, you're saying I deny that it's true. And B, the other definition they give is the doctrine that there is no deity. That's the Merriam-Webster dictionary. The compact Oxford English Dictionary defines atheism as the belief that God does not exist. The Cambridge Advanced Learners Dictionary says that an atheist is someone who believes that God or gods do not exist. Okay, and I could go on reciting examples. So
Well, yes.
So the point is that both theological sources, philosophy sources, and ordinary vernacular sources that are supposed to capture how people actually talk all agree that atheism is the denial, the rejection of theism, okay, not the mere lack of belief, right? And that is why, by the way, theists are so genial to agnostics, because they see them as closer to their position, and they're so hostile to atheists because we atheists, we're the God deniers, right? When we were beyond the pale as far as certain kinds of theists are, depending on their theology. Please go ahead.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though. None of those definitions that you gave actually refute anything that I said, because it's the belief. It's like the belief that a God doesn't exist. That's not a claim. Right. That's not like a positive assertion that we know a God doesn't exist or anything like that. Or it's not a positive assertion that atheists say God doesn't exist, like a hardline position. The atheism is the belief that gods don't exist. Normally, it's because, there's no evidence to suggest one does exist. So for all intents and purposes, God doesn't exist. But it's not a positive claim in the direction of, saying that I know God doesn't exist or anything like that. Like in general conversation, atheists may say that, gods don't exist or God doesn't exist or whatnot like that. But what people should really start saying and what they probably really mean is that they don't believe a God exists. And I think that a lot of people don't understand like the difference between belief and knowledge.
Well, the distinction between belief and knowledge is sort of literally my area of expertise. My grad studies in philosophy were in epistemology specifically. So I'm quite familiar with the distinction between belief and knowledge. But I can believe that a God doesn't exist, as I said earlier, without knowing or without claiming to know. I don't know that no God exists. I believe that no God exists. I'm an atheist. Steve, on the other hand, would never go so far as to say he believes no God exists. He doesn't believe the proposition no God exists is one that I think is true, that he doesn't think is true. He thinks it could be true. The proposition God does exist is one I reject as false. It's one he doesn't reject as false. He thinks it might be true. Right? To suggest that he and I belong under the same label is a mistake.
He earlier he said that he lacks a belief in a God.
Yes, all atheists.
He doesn't believe a God exists.
No, look. All atheists lack a belief. I coined a term, lack theism. Everyone who lacks a belief in a God, okay, lacks a belief in a God, right? Right. Lack theists are non-theists. Okay. If you aren't a theist, then you're a non-theist. But there are multiple kinds of non-theists. Let me enumerate some. Okay. Theists aren't non-theists. Theists are theists. Therefore, they're not non-theists. But then you've got this big umbrella, non-theism. Who falls under that? Well, first of all, people like me, people like you, people who think gods don't exist. Okay. Then there are agnostics. They don't affirm the truth, the existence of a God. So they also fall under non-theism. Okay. Then there are people who are called theological non-cognitivists or igtheists. These are people who think the concept of God is so incoherent, okay, so filled with conceptual confusions that literally we're not talking about anything when we talk about God. The proposition God exists doesn't even make sense. It's like asking, what's the difference between a duck? That sounds like a question, but it's not a question, okay? And so asking, does God exist, isn't a question, according to a theological non-cognitivist. According to a theological non-cognitivist, and this is actually a fairly popular position in this landscape, according to a theological non-cognitivist, non-theists are out to lunch because they're going around saying there's a God. Atheists are out to lunch because they're saying, yeah, probably there's no God, or definitely there's no God. And agnostics are out to lunch because they're saying, I can't make up my mind when there's nothing about which to make up your mind. I mean, to a theological non-cognitivist, nobody has any business affirming, denying, or even wondering if there's a God, because there's no there. It's a meaningless discourse. Okay. Now, so a theological non-cognitivist is also a non-theist, but that person is definitely not an atheist. A theological non-cognitivist is a person who thinks atheists are nuts. They're as stupid as the theists. Those people are wasting their time talking about whether or not a God exists and trying to argue that there isn't a God. right? They're not even talking about something that can be talked about. It's beyond, it's like talking about a square circle, right? It's incoherent, okay? The discourse is so polluted and confused that it makes no sense. Now, to suggest that agnostics, atheists, theological non-cognitivists, right? People who don't agree on these positions, that they all belong under one heading, non-theism, is fine. But to suggest that they all should be lumped under the heading of atheism, I think does violence to what their actual positions are. It muddies the water. And so we end up losing precision, rigor, specificity, and clarity about what people's actual positions are. Could I just say one last remark? We've talked an awful lot about atheism, and we were supposed to talk about agnosticism. So I'm happy to return to that subject whenever people would like.
All right, well, I know Godless Cranium was wanting to say something. So could he say something first, and then we can get back on the agnosticism track?
I just wanted to say really quick that it just seems like what Ozzy is describing is like a spectrum of belief or non-belief, right? Like, so on what GE was saying, on the Gnostic side, you'd have people that, you know, literally claim I can prove that there's no God, and on the other end, you'd have theists that would say the same about God. And in the middle, and then so I think we could just, like, I find this whole conversation, not this specific conversation, but whenever I run into this conversation, to be just so frustrating, because it's so easy to just kind of get past by just saying, you know, what do you believe and why, and move on, right? Like, who cares whether the person wants to call themselves an agnostic or wants to call themselves an atheist? Like, I just say atheist because it's easy. But if somebody said, well, why are you an atheist? That's the question that should be asked, right? And then I would say, this is why I'm an atheist. This is what I believe.
I think I understand.
Bypass it all. Just bypass it, because it's just a waste of time to argue about terms. You just spend your entire time talking about terms.
Yeah, and I'm going to put this out there. This is not arguing about definitions of terms. These are conceptual things that we're talking about, right? But you're right. But when I'm having an engagement, right, and people say, "Well, Steve, you know, you're agnostic, therefore you're an atheist." Do you see? It would be the same exact thing if I said, "Hey, you know, godless engineer, you're a theist because you know God exists." You would have the same affront to it. You'd be the same. Going, no, I'm not. You can't tell me what my theological position is, right?
No,
you'd be offended by that.
But that's where you and I are different, because I would not deny, like, I would just say, oh, under my definition, your lack of belief makes you an atheist. I would not be attempting to say you suddenly deny gods. I would merely be saying, oh, you actually happen to fit under the thing that I call atheist. Yeah, I wouldn't be attempting to change your position.
But that's you, right? But there are other people that do.
Okay, well, it seems to.
I don't think I've ever
just
heard
to interject.
Like, I don't think I've ever heard anybody ever say, you have to be an atheist. I'm not saying it's never happened, but most of the time it would be false. It would be false
all the time, man. If there are certain groups, because again, we have a you know, a community, right? And you guys are all, you know, members, and I mean the whole internet. I mean, like, the YouTube community as a whole, right? There's atheist advocates out there that put forth this narrative, right, that atheism is any lack of belief. You lack a belief in God, you are an atheist, period. There's no other option. There's no other thing. You lack a belief, you're an atheist, right? And so when people listen to that and they go, wait a minute here, I'm being told by such and such, who's a very prominent atheist leader, which I, again, have the utmost respect for almost all of them, they don't understand that that's not true, right? That is not the case. And so they think, then wait one second, they think in their mind's eye, right, that when I put forth that, oh wait, hey, I'm not a theist, I'm not an atheist, I'm like local, I'm like out of my mind. There could be, that's not possible, right? Does that make sense? And so they say you have to be one or the other. It's like, no, I don't. There's nothing logical about me having to say that I have to be one or the other, because I'm not. And that's perfectly acceptable.
Well, if you find
okay, before Ozzy, go ahead, GC.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm not saying that they don't make the lack of belief argument. I've heard that many times over, but they're usually making it in from what I've experienced, anyways. From Paul's kind of view, there is that they usually say, according to my definition, you'd be an atheist. That doesn't necessarily mean that they say that you have to. That you have to label yourself as an atheist.
But
right?
They do assert that quite often. I could say, well, under my definition of X, you're an orange, you're a cow under my definition, but that doesn't really mean anything to anything, right? It's what I'm telling you my theological position is.
Well, okay. Right quick before Ozzy goes, and I think I know Koolaid was wanting to go, and also Nicola, but I just want to say that I think that it's a real asshole move to be in a discussion and then, you know, start up an argument over, you know, whether somebody labels themselves an atheist. I mean, I've posted on my page before about, you know, the definitions of agnostic and Gnostic and theism and atheism and whatnot. But I mean, that's because it's my page and that's how I view these definitions that we're talking about. But I mean, if you're in a conversation and, you know, you start off by being like, no, you're an atheist. I don't care what you say, you're an atheist. Like, I don't feel like it's necessary to force your position or force your view of things on another person. In a debate, it's supposed to be like exchanging ideas. So, I mean, getting caught up on this whole discussion that we're having right now just obfuscates the entire debate or whatever kind of conversation that you're having. I just wanted to throw that out there real quick. And I believe Ozzy's next.
Thank you. I think the obfuscation arises, and these conflicts arise over the definitions, precisely because we atheist activists, I shouldn't say we, I don't really consider myself an atheist activist, although I'm a fairly outspoken atheist, but because atheist activists have tried to change the definition from the view that there isn't a God to the view that anybody who lacks a belief is an atheist, right? So broadening the umbrella that way and subsuming and sweeping all of the theological non-cognitivists and all of the agnostics under one big tent has generated a lot of semantic confusion, right? And then you have a generation of people sort of growing up thinking that this is the definition of atheism, the mere lack of a belief, and then they encounter someone who's an agnostic who says, I don't think that there's a God, and I don't think that there isn't a God. I'm undecided on the matter, thinking about it, you know. And they go around and they tell these people, you actually belong under this heading, whether you realize it or not. That's where I think the semantic confusion is coming from. The lack of belief idea is something that sort of was first sort of come up with in the 70s by a philosopher named Anthony Flew. That was sort of his view, and it's taken root in atheist activist circles. I think because it does a number of things. One of the things it does is inflates the numbers, right? I mean, we atheists are in a very, very small minority. We don't have a large voice, and we live in, those of us who live in Western democracies would like to be able to boast that our ranks are bigger than they are. And one way to do that is to equate atheism with mere non-theism, and then poof, suddenly all the agnostics are under our tent. I mean, really, American atheists ought to call themselves American non-theists, and then the problem disappears. So that's one motive. Another motive, I think, is the idea of burden of proof. We're all of us atheists exhausted hearing theists try to burden shift and say, you've got to prove that there isn't a God, when they're in the middle of boasting that they know that there's a God, or they believe that there's a God, or have reason to think there's a God. Yeah, and what has happened is I think a lot of atheists have made the mistake of giving up on reminding the other person that the burden is theirs, and simply said, well, I don't have a burden, because I'm not making any positive assertion, I'm not actually claiming that there isn't a God. When in fact, people like Aaron Ra and David Silverman and myself, we're all saying that there isn't a God. You know, Matt Dillahunty, we're all saying there's no gods. We think that this is all bullshit. Sorry, I don't know what your rules are about language here, but you know. I think that. Well, actually, I've seen a few, but it's a
if you're Canadian and you swear, you have to apologize for it. That's the rule.
I don't know what your rules are for your hangouts. You know? So, but anyway,
it's been said worse on this channel.
So I think the semantic confusion actually comes from our side of the table here. I'm saying we atheists. But I wanted to address something that that Godless Cranium brought up about the 50-50 argument. Like, so turning back to agnosticism now, does it make sense to say that to speak of agnosticism, is that a tenable position? You know, I mean, how many people are really on the fence, 50-50? Well, the metaphor, you know, being on the fence, I mean, it's just a metaphor, it's figurative language, right? We don't mean that literally. The person is sort of like you tipping, one way or the other. What we mean is they're undecided. They're not either on this side or that side. It's not that they're precariously posed and it'll take nothing to tip them over and they're at 50-50, right? Let me give you another sort of thought experiment. Supposing I have a deck of cards here and I say to you, listen, this next card that I'm going to pull out, is it going to be black or red? You go, I don't know. Okay, so I take a card out and I flip it over and it's red. Okay, and I say, okay, this next card, is it going to be black or red? Now you know that I pulled out a red card, so there's now one more black card than red. I pull out the card and it's another red card. And let's say I keep pulling out the red cards so that there's fewer and fewer red cards in there, and an increasing proportion of black cards remain in the deck. At some point, you're going to say, okay, I'm not sure, before I was like on the fence 50-50, I couldn't really do anything but guess. Right? I wouldn't have, affirmed that the next card was going to be red or black, right? But there's going to be a point somewhere in there where it's so much more likely that the next card I'm going to take out is going to be, black and not red, that you're going to guess black because there's mostly black cards left, right? And you're not going to have to be certain about it, right? But the point is, a person can still be uncertain, undecided, not confident that the next card is black, even though they know it's a little bit more likely that it's black, right? They don't have to get down to the last card, right? And then say, so okay, there's now 26 cards left. All the ones I took out are all red. All that remains is black. Only now will you affirm that you think it's going to be black. No. So one's confidence exists on a spectrum, right? And a person who is undecided, right, is a person who might be tugged one way or the other, but that they're still not prepared to affirm. I remember, I started out as a fundamentalist, right? When I was a fundamentalist and I fell out of my faith in my adolescence, I went through a phase of agnosticism where I really could not make up my mind whether there was a God or not. I would consider arguments and reasons and evidence one way or the other. Some of it I would find convincing, some of it I would find nonsense, and then I would look over here, the proposition that there isn't a God, and I would go, yeah, there's good reasons for thinking there's no God. But then that's, I can think of a defeater for that argument. And so I would find myself in a kind of uncomfortable equilibrium where I knew one of the two had to be correct, right? They can't both be correct, they can't both be wrong. There's either a God or there isn't. But I'm not in an epistemological position to assert with any confidence at all which one is true, even though I might, lean a little bit and think, well, maybe it's a little bit more likely, but I don't think it's so much more likely that I would affirm that it's true. Another example, is there intelligent life in the galaxy? Not saying the whole universe, just saying the galaxy. Okay. People often have very strong intuitions about this, right? Definitely there's going to be intelligent life elsewhere in the galaxy, or definitely there's not. But most people will say, well, I'm undecided, and we'll need to see the evidence. Now, you can be undecided, but still be inclined to think probably, yeah. But that doesn't make you someone who actually believes that there's life in the universe, or actually believes there isn't life in the universe. You can be tugged in one direction or the other and still be undecided, because you think to decide now, right? To affirm it even provisionally would be premature, given the state of the evidence that you have. And a lot of agnostics, a lot of people are that way. And I think strategically and politically, it's imprudent of us as atheists to insist that you're going to go from theism into atheism right away. I think we have to sort of allow people to sort of be on the fence and think things through. And we're not doing ourselves any favor by subsuming agnostics under the heading of atheism. They're already under the heading of non-theism with us. What more do we need? So that would be my view.
Nicola.
Hey, Nicola.
Nicola.
Thank you for reminding me of that wonderful commercial.
Never gonna let you forget it.
What I was going to say was a while ago, Godless Engineer has said that, this is how we colloquially use the definition nowadays, is that we use the word atheism to refer to a lack of belief. The problem is, colloquially, it isn't used that way, and it's not even used that way formally either. It is used particularly by a specific group of people to refer to a lack of belief. And that's just a private linguistic group's definition of it. And it isn't incredibly informative when we're in these discussions. Because if I ask you, what is it you believe about this proposition? And you tell me, well, I don't believe this. That doesn't really tell me anything. It's really approaching the whole conversation like some weird game of 20 questions. So like if I ask you, what do you believe about the proposition some God exists? And you tell me, well, it just doesn't make any sense. It's not even a proposition. Well, now I know you're a theological non-cognitivist, and that tells me something about the positions that you hold and the stances you take. If you say, I believe that this proposition is false, I would call you an atheist. These definitions are still colloquial, they are formal, and they are far more clear than anything that is used by people like Dave Silverman or Matt Dillhunty or Aaron Ra, despite what they would prefer them to mean. That's really all I had to say on that.
I think I agree with every sentence of that, actually. I think that we've lost specificity and precision by introducing this, where a person says, I'm an atheist, and then you have to say, well, what kind of atheist are you? Are you agnostic or an agnostic atheist? When practically everybody would identify as a agnostic atheist anyway.
Well, a good analogy of that would be, what kind of dog do you have? And you say the barking kind as opposed to Chihuahua.
Right, exactly. When people ask you, when you're sort of in the discourse of the Great Debate, when they ask you these questions, they want to know what your position is. And so when you say, I'm a theist, they know you believe in a God. And if you say I'm an agnostic, they know you're undecided. You haven't made up your mind about it. You're either a theist or an atheist. But when I say I'm an atheist, well, I'm being clear. I'm saying there isn't a God, that there aren't any gods really. Some gods I think not stupid to believe in, but some of them I think make no sense at all. But if you're a sort of Dave Silverman, Aaron Ra style atheist, an atheist who defines atheism so broadly as to include all the other categories, then when I ask someone like, and I say, what's your position? They say I'm an atheist. If they're using this sort of newfangled definition, I don't know what their position is. I don't know if they think there's no God. I don't know if they're theological non-cognitivists and they think the whole discourse is polluted and all God talk is stupid. Or are they agnostic and on the fence and undecided about the existence of God? In other words, their position has not been clarified, right? The proposition, God exists, I mean, do you think that's true or false, right? I'm left wondering, and this is what the where the semantic confusion comes from. You are not, in fact, being more precise by subsuming everybody under the umbrella of the term atheism. Right? We already have a large umbrella term, non-theism. It too has been around since the 1850s. And why isn't that term more popular? Because it's not very useful to call yourself a non-theist. It'd be like walking into a room and saying, I'm a non-atheist. And people go, you're a what? I'm a non-atheist. I lack a belief in the non-existence of God. And well, wait a minute, does that mean you're an atheist, or does that mean you're a theological non-cognitivist, or does that mean you're an agnostic? Right? Like you're not informing me of where you stand on this question. These labels existed, have been coined, and have been around for centuries, some of them, precisely because they break people up into mutually exclusive groups: the people who believe in God, the people who think there isn't a God, the people who are undecided, and the people who think that the whole discourse is polluted and makes no sense, and all those people who adopt those other labels are out to lunch. And so I think we have forsaken precision and rigor and specificity by adopting a broader label. And this is why I think agnostics find it so galling. And I think we would do better to have a sort of a typology of agnostics and a better understanding of what kinds of agnosticism there are. Maybe Steve should speak to that. He's an agnostic.
Well, I think Thomas wanted to add something, and if we have to wrap this up soon, there's so much more we could talk about, and if we can, I maybe continue it later on somewhere. But I think Thomas wanted to add to this, and I would kind of like to get a minute on here if we could. If he's still here.
I am.
So thank you.
On this note, I really don't know any atheists that I've talked to, maybe one or two, who would say that that they're a Gnostic, or a Gnostic atheist. I know people all the time who will say, "Oh, I know that there's a God for sure," and it's normally on faulty evidence. But and we hear this all the time in atheist circles. It's impossible to prove a negative. But if, let's say, you look at the whole Earth and you're like, I've never seen a purple dinosaur. Well, you can't disprove that until you literally have cameras all over the Earth, looking at it at the same time. And that's close to what we're getting to. We have 7 billion people. We have billions of smartphones. We have satellites. Before long, it's already at a point where if there are dinosaurs that exist, it would have been impossible for them to evade some type of smartphone camera lens. It's pretty safe to say that one doesn't exist from a Gnostic position. Now, when I look at the universe and claims about God, I see it in somewhat the same way. I don't think of it as just looking at a jar and there's equally good evidence to be convinced that there's an odd number or there's an even number. I see it as a jar full of red pills and blue pills, or red objects and blue objects, and you can see that the jar is all the way filled to the top with blue objects, and there isn't a single red object visible. And someone says, are there more red objects than blue objects? And I'd have to say, well, to me, it's pretty obvious that there's, just blue objects, or I don't even see any evidence for a red object. But then from someone looking at the jar from the other side, they may see mostly red objects. And they think that there's more red objects than blue objects. So while on the one hand, I don't know of any atheists who say I am a Gnostic atheist, almost all of them say, I'm agnostic. So I think that's where some of the frustration comes for people like me and Godless Engineer and possibly a Godless Cranium, where we don't want for people who hear that we're an atheist to assume that we're making a knowledge claim. But at the same time, you've got, people like Steve who are kind of more in the middle, who don't want to make a statement of belief because they're not sure. And I think that's where some of the impasse comes from.
And then I would add with where Ozzy you were trying to say, I think you were trying to say that in general people don't use atheist as a lack of belief outside of the people who call themselves that. That is not my experience. I recently came out of young Earth creationism. I lived my whole life in young Earth creationism. And the Ken Hams and the Kent Hovens and all the Hovens and everyone on that side, the CMI, they are now lumping all of the lack of belief people as atheists. That label is not, maybe in the trenches where I live, the atheist label is as broadly applied as you can imagine. Now, partially because they want to set up a false enemy. They want to set up, an us versus them on all counts, so that makes total sense. But, it's not that there's only one camp. It's not the reason. And definitions, of course,
they change.
Definitions change. And also definitions, the dictionary theoretically tells you how it's being used, not, what it should mean. So I really think that, it's been since 1970, you say that we've been using it this way.
No, that's when it was first proposed. Okay. Anthony Flew, I think. I don't know. Yeah, sometimes in the early 70s.
It was 1972 when he came forth with the presumption of atheism.
But anyway, so obviously that's been going on for 40 years. And, if that's the way the language is going, then we are stuck in this situation where if you want to get to the precision of it, it doesn't matter what side you're on. You have to ask the questions. The mere labels, because they're so fluid, aren't sufficient.
I'll take that, Philip, about that corrective about religious people lumping agnostics under atheism. I think if they are doing that, I think it's because they've heard the way we've been talking and decided to adopt it. I'm not familiar with that pattern, but if it's happening, I think that's unfortunate because now the agnostics are going to be getting it from all sides now, and I think that's unfortunate for them. And I think I can think of the theological reasons why Christians, especially, would want to do that. Christians love, they have sort of persecution fantasies. They thrive on the idea that they are a persecuted minority, and so if they can minimize their ranks and suggest that they're under threat, even if they are in an overwhelming majority, that suits their political ends, right? So for them to suggest that they are marginalized and atheism is growing and looming larger, I think that serves their political ends. So I can see why they might do that. So you might very well be correct about that. I'll take you at your word that is a growing thing. And I certainly agree that definitions change and evolve, right? And we get semantic shifts, right? And I might be on the wrong side of history here, arguing for a set of terms and concepts that I think are nice and clear and mutually exclusive and should be preserved. I might be on the losing end of that, and I think we will just forsake some rigor and specificity and precision. So be it. That can certainly happen. There are bigger questions. I had a question to the group though, since we're mostly atheists in this room. Do people think agnosticism is a tenable or reasonable position to hold? Is there any agnosticism that you would countenance as respectable, intellectually respectable?
I would count, like what the debate is supposed to be about, temporal agnosticism is a tenable position to hold. That just given the circumstances, we don't have enough to say whether or not God exists in any confident manner. I don't know if that'd be a good way of putting it. I can appreciate and understand that position, even though I don't hold it.
Well, for me personally, I think that anybody that says God does indeed exist or that God does indeed not exist, they hold the same level of burden of proof. So like if I were to say that God definitely doesn't exist, then I would need to prove that God doesn't exist. And that's a really hard, if not impossible thing to do. But also to prove God exists, I feel is of the same kind of quality, I guess. So I would say that agnostic is a very tenable position.
And I certainly think it's a tenable position. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm having the conversation with. Everybody here is basically a non-theist. I think we're all non-theist. And there's some prevalent people in here. You guys have influence. There's no question, right? So I definitely think it's a tenable position because I have it. I hold it. And that's why when again we go back to some of the other atheist advocates and these people that are in a position where people listen to them because they have a channel and they have an audience and they command a presence, and they're telling people, well, you know what? Yeah, you can't be an agnostic. You're either an atheist or a theist. There's no other option. That's where I think the problem comes in, because that's not.
Steve, I would like to point out here how, I get your complaint that people want to force these positions on you, but it just feels like this entire hangout here has been you and Ozzy trying to force these definitions on the rest of us. I don't, maybe I'm wrong in that, but it really feels like you guys are trying to assert, no, we're the right ones, you're the wrong ones, use our definitions.
No, not
I just think that it's really unfair to come in here and be like, oh, well, we're all non-theist. Well, that's kind of a label, and I don't think, I don't know if you should just assume that we would all want to be under that particular banner if we're going with how this conversation started out. Like, you don't want me to label you as an atheist. Okay, that's fine. I won't. I'm not going to sit here and try to force that position on you. But at the same time, while I would call myself a non-theist, I'm not going to sit here and assume that other people would label themselves non-theist. It's a two-way street there, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, let me address this. I got an echo. You guys hear that?
Yes.
Ozzy, I think it might be you. No, it's Godless Cranium. Okay, what you just said, no, but not by any stretch of the imagination. Nobody's asserting that people should use one definition or another. Again, it's not a definition. Can we mute Ozzy for a second? Oh, okay. It's not nobody's asserting that anybody has to use anything else. What my position is, they're asserting that you only can be a lack of belief position, right? They're asserting that the only definition for atheism that even exists is a lack of belief. We're saying, no, there's more than that, right? We're not saying you have to use either direct definition or either concept. People can do what they want, right? And we're just saying what personally, what I think is a better, more, as I say better per se, but it more useful, more defined, more the specificity there with the definitions that I particularly want to use. But as you said something that I thought was kind of interesting, you said, Steve, you labeled everybody here a non-theist. Well, the only other option, if you're not a non-theist, is you're a theist. And I know for a fact nobody in here is a theist because I know nobody in here.
Well, no. We were asserting how, non-theist would be a better way to describe some people. And I just, I label myself as an agnostic atheist. I would not label myself non-theist, while technically that is the thing. Like the label that I consider myself under is an agnostic atheist, and I proudly label myself that. I'm not scared of calling myself an agnostic atheist. I feel like saying that I'm just a non-theist is kind of shying away from the atheist word or the agnostic.
Right.
It would be.
Right. That's the whole thing. But I think you may have misunderstood. I don't think non-theist is a useful label. I think it's too umbrella. It's too big. It doesn't give you any specificity. However, you are a non-theist. That is a fact. You don't hold a God belief. You're not a theist. So you are a non-theist. But it's not a label you would go around saying, hey, look, I'm a non-theist. It doesn't really tell anybody anything. But you are a non-theist, right?
Yeah. See, go ahead. Well, I was going to say if the concern is that you don't want to call yourself a non-theist because you're a proud and out atheist, I would say, well, that's good. Then why would you want to define atheism as identical, as equivalent to non-theism? I mean, remember, it's the Aaron Ra's and the David Silvermans who are the ones equivocating between atheism and non-theism. It is they who have broadened the definition so that it means non-theism, right? And now you're quibbling literally over the sound that we utter. Are we gonna utter atheism or non-theism? Well, we mean the same thing by them. I'm the one who's suggesting we don't mean the same thing by them. We have never meant the same by them. We don't colloquially, out there in the world, people understand that atheism is the rejection, the denial of the existence of a God, right? Theology.
That's what I said before.
I'm sorry?
That's the opposite of what I said before. I think that the definitional shift is changing.
Yeah, I'm not so convinced that that's the case if you go out in the world. I mean, I have conversations out in the world with people, and now I'm not talking to tons of religious people, admittedly. I live in Canada, and I don't bump into a lot of fundamentalists and evangelicals. So the Ken Colvin variety, I don't encounter. But the substantive.
That's what you get from living in Eastern Canada. Come visit us in the prairies for a bit, Ozzy. You'll meet those fundamentalists.
Yeah, well, I lived in Alabama for a little bit, so I know what it's like. I know what it's like bumping into somebody you've never met and chatting them up on the street while you're walking your dog and having them ask you, "So which church do you go to?" The presumption of Christianity is just a little bit galling, and you find yourself, okay, geez, now a total stranger on a lonely street. Do I want to start telling them that I think that they're in the grip of a delusion? I don't know if this is the best time to do this, So
that's when you say "Assalamu alaikum" to them.
Yeah. So I proudly identify as an atheist, and I have no compunction against it. And I'm encouraging people who think that gods don't exist to call themselves atheists, but to not identify other people who are merely non-theists but not atheists, and not equate them with atheism. That, I think, is a mistake. So I'm not encouraging that atheists go around calling themselves non-theists, right? Atheists are non-theists, right? I mean, the shoe fits, right? We are non-theists, right? But it doesn't define or describe the position that we hold. It doesn't tell a person whether we think a God exists or whether we think a God doesn't exist or whether we're on the fence, right? So that's why I am recommending that we in the activists and people in the skeptical movement, I would consider myself someone in the skeptical movement, that we embrace the traditional definition because we have nothing to lose by it and everything to gain. And I think we alienate a lot of people who are on the fence, who are potentially political allies and are likely to move in our direction. But we sort of alienate people and put people off when we tell them, well, your view and my view have the same name, just because we both fall under the broader umbrella of non-theism, which is not particularly descriptive because it's so broad.
Okay, look, that's my whole point in bringing up the absurdity of pushing labels on people and everything like that. I'm not actually trying to quibble over like what words you use. I'm saying that this entire conversation is ridiculous. If you're going to start quibbling over what labels you put on each other, then you know, you might as well just have only that kind of quibbling over really nonsensical things like non-theism. And to me, if you're changing, you know, from atheism to non-theism as just a way to get around saying the atheist word, that just makes it seem like atheism is now, or atheist is now, just a bad word to use, and the better word is non-theism. So that's why I disagree with it, and that's why I brought it up. It wasn't to actually quibble over you labeling people non-theist or anything like that. It's just to show the absurdity of the argument.
Godless engineer, can I? It sounds like some of your frustration comes with the fact that, you know, we're all dealing with the stigma of the word atheist, and we're fighting that uphill battle. We're fighting up against the fact that the evangelicals are a massive voting bloc in the United States. They have massive power, and yet they'll just look at atheists and say, oh, hey, look, you're just a small little measly 5%, whereas non-believers are actually a much larger voting bloc than that. It's something like 20% of the American population is like non-religious. So is it safe to say that that's where some of the frustration's coming from? Is that, you know, you look at the spectrum and you're like, look, almost no one is in the middle. You know, most people lean one way or another on whether or not they believe in God. Which side do you lean towards? Are you, you know, more likely to believe in God or not? And you want allies in breaking some of this stigma. Is that safe to say?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would like people to break that stigma of being an atheist, and I feel like convoluting the conversation with these very specific definitions that come from very specific areas of conversation only seek to obfuscate the discussion being had. Whereas, you know, I know that like Ozzy and Nicola and Steve are saying that, you know, atheism has this very specific meaning that's been, you know, somehow tainted by current atheist activists. I would disagree, because I mean, just like Godless Cranium and Paul, you know, I have only like I have been able to interact with people who feel that atheism is a very Gnostic claim that a God doesn't exist. But for the most part, you know, I've encountered people that are of, you know, the whole, it's just a lack of belief in a God. And so, I mean, I guess I just fundamentally disagree with this idea that atheism is this is more than just a lack of belief in a God. And to say that it is more than that, I feel muddies the waters, and it continues this stigma that lies upon the word atheist. And I would agree with Koolaid, Thomas here, that is what kind of quote unquote triggers me.
Yeah, I think I believe the exact opposite of that. First of all, I don't have any stigma problem with the term atheist. I mean, God knows some of the things I talk about are controversial things. I couldn't care less if I actually held that position. If I actually said, yeah, you know what, I am a atheist. I believe there is definitely no God whatsoever. I couldn't care less what people thought of me about that. I have no worry about stigma. That's not the reason why I don't have a position of atheism. Right? And I understand that stigma exists, absolutely, and it should be talked about. It's a shame that stigma exists, right? But that's not anything that does deal with me, right? I don't have that problem. That's not the reason why I accept it. Does that make sense? Well, I mean, that's why I don't accept it. I have no problem accepting atheism if that was my actual belief, but it's not. And because I have a theological position that is a very thought out and acceptable definition by philosophical standards of agnosticism, when you have these atheist activists going out there and telling people, you know what, the atheism is just a lack of belief, which is wrong. It's not just a lack of belief. It could be a lack of belief or a belief that God does not exist. There's two definitions out there, right? It could be either one. And I'm fine with accepting either one. I just think one's better. I think the very narrow definition is better, but that's personal preference. But when they're saying you cannot be just an agnostic. You cannot hold a position other than atheism or theism. That's what I hear, and that's what people parrot. That's what people repeat. That's my issue. Does that make sense? I hope it does, because that's the real crux of the matter. That's where the whole thing lies.
Okay, let's go with Thomas real quick on Godless Cranium's thing about agnosticism being a legitimate stance. I don't know, Thomas, if you want to answer that at all or not, but
well, I mean, when Steve said, you know, that he thinks that agnosticism is, you know, it's a tenable position, and that, you know, you should be able to just be an agnostic. I wanted to ask Steve. It sounds like you're not arguing that there's, you know, that you can't have agnostic atheists and agnostic theists and Gnostic and atheists and Gnostic theists, but that when it comes to theism versus atheism, you're on the fence on that. But when it comes to Gnostic or agnostic, you just identify as agnostic. Is that a fair assessment?
I think I get what you were saying. So let me see if I can parse this out. If somebody wants to identify as agnostic theist or agnostic atheist, that's not my concern. They could do that. I think it's very superfluous to say agnostic atheism. It doesn't really make that much sense to me. But if it does to somebody else, go for it, right? I am never advocating people can't identify with what they want to identify with, right? But when they tell me you can't have a pure agnostic position, there's no such thing, well, that's fundamentally wrong. That is absolutely, unequivocally not true. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're still between Gnostic and agnostic. You're agnostic, but between theist and atheist, you're on the fence.
That's kind of what agnosticism is, right? You don't accept the theist position, you don't accept the atheist position, right?
But most of us would say, even though we're agnostic atheists, when it comes to that spectrum, we lean more towards the atheist end of the spectrum.
Yeah, but that's the whole point. That's you, right?
Yeah, well, and I'm saying, but in your case, you're more right in the middle.
I am more right. Yes, correct. Yes, and that's perfectly acceptable. There's nothing wrong with that. You talk. What's funny is the atheists have this thing that and it is a concern, and it's a very, very big concern about the stigma of that label atheism. And there's reasons for that, right? There's political reasons, there's family reasons, there's very good reasons why some people don't want to identify with an atheist as an atheist. I get that, right? And it's a shame. But those things do exist. But by changing this whole thing where you have to be either atheist or theist, you're now saying, you know what? You're putting a stigma on atheism. You're now allowing people to be. You're putting a stigma on agnosticism. You're now allowing people to be agnostic. You're saying, you know what? You're an agnostic. That you can't have that. There's a stigma now attached to it. I have a stigma in the YouTube community. Right, not just the great debate community that you know I have. It's the YouTube in general, because you know my name's out there. I have a stigma among prevalent atheists that I'm agnostic, that I have a position that's not tenable, that I have a stigma that I shouldn't have that position. It's not appropriate to have that position, and that I don't want to use the word offensive, right? But it is a little offensive because I have a well thought out position. These are not arbitrary beliefs that I have. People have known over the last 3 years, I've spent a lot of time diving into philosophy and learning some of these basic things. And I got to tell you, 3 years ago, I would have not known any of this shit. I thought philosophy was crap, to be honest with you. I always had a background in science a little bit. I liked science. I was not somebody who was philosophically minded. I didn't see a need for it. But as I got more interested in it, I was like, you know what? There is a understanding here. There is a need for it because I wanted to have beliefs that I thought were legit, that I thought were corresponding to reality, because I want my beliefs to be true. And that is why I have this temporal agnosticism position, because I'm not yet at a position where I can decide the belief that God does not exist or the belief that God does exist and be comfortable enough to say that that comports with reality.
To answer the question that Godless Engineer posed at me from Godless Cranium of whether or not I think that agnosticism is a legitimate stance, the reason that I directed that question at Steve is because I do see the reason why so many people get frustrated at you, Steve, for not taking a hardline stance is because people want they want people in general to take hardline stances. They want you to say, I am in this camp or I am in that camp. Where do you fall on the spectrum? And when you sit right in the middle, I think the Gnostic and agnostic thing I do think of as separate from atheist versus theist, but where you rest between atheism and theism is right in the middle, and people want to push you more or pull you more towards their camp.
You're exactly right. Yeah, and let me tell you,
you're still an agnostic, and we're still agnostics. All of us are saying we don't know.
Well, no, that's I think where we part. But let me tell you something.
But I would say that I'm an agnostic atheist, and you would say that you're an agnostic who's undecided on the issue.
But you're using it as a modifier. I'm using it as a position. And let me say something real quick, and Ozzy can. We're all allies to a certain degree, right? I am agreeing a lot with the atheist community. I'm on the United Atheism thing. I'm a skeptic. I'm against creationism. I'm against creation being taught in school. I'm against intelligent design. I am the atheist ally in that regard, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so I mean we're all on the same page when it comes to that, but there still has to be some kind of thing where I say, look, I have to be true to my epistemic beliefs, or my knowledge beliefs that I don't know either way, and I won't claim to be either way. There's a difference between saying I believe God exists and I know God does not exist. These are all Dostastic positions, right? Theism is a Dostastic position. It's not a knowledge claim. When somebody says I am a theist, they're not saying I know God exists. They're saying I believe. I don't know God exists. They're saying I believe God exists. Not that I know it. These are not knowledge claims. So when you just say, well, I'm an agnostic atheist, well, so what? If you're already an atheist, you're already making just a belief claim. You're not adding anything to it by saying you're an agnostic atheist. But that's fine to do so. But by saying you're agnostic atheist, you're not a middle of the ground agnostic like I'm using the term, right?
And we're back to the difference between we're not talking about definitions. We're talking about the concepts that these labels are meant to represent.
Well, but listen, concepts have definitions. Without definitions, concepts are useless. They're just, you have to be able to define a concept. So yes, it is about definitions when you get down to the heart of it.
No, but
no, you could just simply apprehend a concept. You don't need a definition of it. You don't need a definition of a circle to concept. See a circle and understand the concept of it.
Can I use a visual?
Oh, we got visuals! Yay! I love visuals.
So I
he cloaked.
Yeah, he just wanted to show himself. He was like,
wait, is this your 30,000 subscriber sign?
No, this is not my 30,000.
By the way, that is not that high-tech a diagram that I would have expected for that.
Perfect, okay.
All right. It doesn't matter. Trump loves charts.
This is a tore-up leftover surfboard cable modem box. But is it flipping my video, or is it still okay? So if we think of it in terms of like you have theist and atheist here, and there's two different ways that you can identify as, I'm either an agnostic or agnostic atheist, or agnostic or agnostic theist. If Steve is right in the middle, he doesn't want to say I'm an agnostic theist or I'm an agnostic atheist. He doesn't want to go to either side because he's saying he doesn't have any more evidence in one direction or the other, or he lacks any evidence to push him in one direction or the other. Whereas, as an atheist, I don't want to say I know 100% for sure I'm Gnostic. I want to say I'm an atheist, but I don't know. And that's where a lot of our frustration comes from, in this camp, and why within the atheist circles you're seeing the definition start to shift towards thinking of it as two separate things. But I do think that you can be completely in the middle and say, I'm not a theist, I'm not an atheist, but I'm an agnostic. But it's still, knowledge and belief are still two different things.
It's so close, Thomas. Actually, can you put that up again? Because I think it's so close, but it's not quite there yet. You can be in the middle. I don't think you really could be dead set in the middle. I mean, sure, in theory. But agnosticism has a little, it can go either way. It can slide a little bit to the right. You can slide a little bit to the left. But that Gnostic you have on top, that exists on both sides. That's the extreme form. And I don't mean extreme as in like extremist, but when you go to the far right, and you get more toward atheism, there's Gnostic. That's where the knowledge comes in. So belief, if you look at it as a landscape, the belief is more kind of in the middle. And as you go with more certitude toward either side, toward the atheism side or to the theist side, that's when you get into more knowledge. Because obviously, the more you believe something, and eventually you can consider it to be knowledge.
So if Thomas were to draw a small circle over the two marks he has in the middle there, would that be where you would kind of fall as an agnostic?
Circle it. I think
That's
Ozzy
the little
might have-
Steve circle.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, I would use a rectangle because you're using a graph like that. But yeah, I mean, that's somewhere in that. But
But
Ozzy,
functionally, that's
please
So
tell
what
me
you're
that
saying-
made a little more. I mean, it made
What
some
you're
sense,
saying
Oz.
instead of that up there,
Yeah, get
you're
rid of that thing
saying-
on top, right? 'Cause the Gnosticism should be.
You're saying that these little circles on either end are Gnostic and agnostic
I wouldn't go that far out.
atheists.
It's actually, but you're outside of the bar there. But
Well, I know, but just
if I could throw it out there, there's Dr. Alex Malpass has this great blog called Use of Reason. He's an atheist, and he has really laid out a very magnificent job of showing the belief knowledge landscape that I think it's really good. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's, to me, I like it. So it just, I think he did a really good job on it. Ozzy,
I think we've come to some kind of consensus then, right? But with the chart.
No, GE and I are still gonna fight you guys.
No, does Ozzy? Do you like?
Hold on.
Do you like
Well,
his
no,
chart?
not.
Is it okay with you?
I'm not trying to fight it. I'm just trying to understand exactly where Steve and Ozzy are coming from. You know what I mean? Like, what exactly are they saying? And I think if, that chart shows that what they're saying is, their stance is kind of in the middle, but it's a little bit, it could be on a little bit on either side, and they would still call themselves an agnostic.
Yeah, there's this play there, right.
Yeah, I would do it a little differently. Traditionally, theism is the belief that there's a God. You can be absolutely committed and feel certain and claim that you know it and believe in a God, or you can be sort of not quite so confident, or you can be very, very guarded in your belief. I mean, there are theists out there who think, yeah, I think probably there's a God, and I believe and I pray, but do I know? No. And, there are some people. So you can be fully in the theist camp, and live your life as a religious person, organize your whole life around the Bible, rear your children to be that way, and yet, you're unsure about certain doctrines. You're not absolutely positive that there's a God. Maybe there isn't. But nevertheless, you think, well, it's true enough in my mind that maybe there's a hell, and I better worry about it and stuff like that. So people can be absolutely fully committed. Hardcore, Ken Ham types, and then a much larger number of religious people are committed in the sense that they will affirm the truth of their religion, but they're not very confident at all. I mean, think of all the Catholics that are merely nominally Catholic. They think there's a God. They think there was a Jesus and he died for their sins, but they have not thought through any theology or any of that. But they're weak Catholics, okay? So you can be very weak and guarded in your belief. Same thing with atheism on the other side. You can be an atheist who's like, no way, all gods are nonsense, okay? And I can prove that all gods are nonsense, and usually they'll have a terrible disproof of all gods, but they'll have something like that, right? And then you'll have some people who think, yeah, I think probably there's no God. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not very confident, but I think there's no God. But I'm not very. I haven't really looked into it, and I don't have strong feelings about it. But I think there's no God, and they live their lives accordingly. And then there are people like me who thought about these questions for quite some time. And I am very, very confident that some gods absolutely don't exist, and most gods make no sense, can be disproved. I mean, I think Christianity is already falsified. But then there are other conceptions of God, like deism, that are thinking, well, it's not impossible. I just don't think there's any good reason to think that they exist. But I mean, I could be wrong about that. But I would still affirm that the deistic creator doesn't exist. Okay. I'm a very provisional atheist. Okay. But I still affirm that there aren't any gods, right? But I'm not claiming to know this, right? I don't even know that Christianity is false, because everything that I think absolutely falsifies Christianity, I could be mistaken about that. So you don't have to be going around boasting, being certain about anything. Right? So there's another circle with a whole range, or a whole, think of it as its own bar. And then you have agnostics, people who go, I can think of reasons to believe in a God, and I can think of reasons why those are bad reasons, and I can think of reasons why there is no God, and I can think of reasons why those are bad reasons, and I'm completely undecided. And and then there's the theological non-cognitivists who think that everybody else is out to lunch and just should shut up about all this talk about whether or not there's a God. There's nothing about which to be uncertain or certain in the first place, right? You guys are all just going around asking meaningless questions like, what's the difference between a duck? It just sounds like intelligent discourse, but it's not. It's meaningless. Okay. So as I see it, these are sort of separate circles, mutually exclusive, but within each circle, you can be dogmatic about it, or you can be guarded, or you can have a kind of very provisional view. You can be informed or ill-informed, well-warranted in your belief, or poorly warranted. That's how I see it.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say Paul Cranium asked you, whether you think agnosticism is a legitimate stance. I was gonna remind you he asked about that. So you got to go next, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Do I think it's a legitimate stance? I mean, if we go back to the odds and evens statement, obviously you can be both a non-evenist and a non-oddist. I mean, so obviously it's a position you can hold. I guess my question in general was if you took. First of all, I don't understand what the temporal part of temporal means. Does that mean it's a temporary thing and that you will eventually figure it out?
No, well, it kind of sort of temporal basically means it's an evidential position. It means that given enough evidence either way, I could change it. It's something that I don't believe that we can never know. A Huxleyan agnostic would say, look, mankind can never know if God exists or not. I don't hold that position. I think that I've kind of thought it through and said, you know what, maybe I can come up with a way where God could be disproven. Maybe God could be proven. Maybe that there's a way that if God exists, he can manifest to people and they can know. If he doesn't exist, how would we ever know that? But I spent a lot of time thinking about those two possibilities. If God doesn't exist, how would we ever know that for certainty? If God does exist, how would we ever know that for certainty? Right. So I'm tentatively speaking as the position that I, as of now, think it may be possible one way or another. And I don't know which way, but a Huxley would say, no, we can never know either way. And I don't hold that, although I do know some.
Okay. So I'm going to turn my camera on for a second. I don't know if you can see me. There you are. So
dun dun dun
dun dun dun. So if I take
just like your cartoon.
That's right. If I took Ken didn't realize it. So if I take my if you look at my
let him talk, guys.
So yeah, so I mean, so what Godless Engineer was talking about, we have knowledge claims versus, belief claims. I really don't see how all the positions can't be described on this chart. Like I know there was the chart that Thomas did that you guys prefer or seem to like better, Steve. But your position is just this center position. I think every position can be described on such a chart as well. Is really my whole point.
If I can rain
where
on
would you
parade
put theological non-cognitivists?
Or where would you put ichtheist?
Yeah,
I'm
theological non-cognitive.
I'm going to be an ichtheist, right? So I don't think this whole conversation makes sense. What the hell's God? I don't know what God means. Where do I fall on there? On that
well,
chart?
that person wasn't on the other chart either.
That's true.
No, but he's on my chart. My chart is separate circles, separate positions. So you can have a theological non-cognitivist or atheist who's dogmatic in their atheism or not, right?
Right, but I think yours frankly was really a spectrum where you were just breaking this. You were just picking a portion in the middle arbitrarily to not be to make some kind of border there.
Well, theism and theism and non-theism. Really, if you were to categorize the two of them, they would break down in the form of a flow chart, really, as opposed to just some kind of weird matrix graph that you have.
Right. I think that as well. You
would categorize people who think that propositions about God actually are true propositions or questions actually make sense. They would be the cognitivists. The people who don't think they make sense would be non-cognitivists, and then you would subdivide down the non-cognitivists.
So you would, we actually have a chart like that. I think it was Nestle that came up with it or something, but yeah, you would have two, obviously your two sets. You have theism or not theism or non-theism. And then under non-theism, you start branching off. You have the cognitivist, you have the non-cognitivist, and then you have the, different things under that, which include atheism and agnosticism. Right?
It breaks down very much similar to how morality breaks down if you were to put it into kind of a flowchart method.
Okay. So, if to answer the question that was posed to me, I guess you can hold that you're neither a hard theist nor a hard atheist. If that's what you define agnosticism as, is this middle ground where you're neither of those things, then that's what I am too. But it's that's why it's kind of it's definitional. That's why I still kind of feel like all of these words in the real world require a conversation, because throwing a label out there doesn't mean enough.
Oh, I agree with you there. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, these are all conversations, but see, here's the thing, Paul, you guys are all rational people, where I think everybody in this room is rational for the position they hold. If I said, hey, why do you believe the position you hold? I think every one of you can give me a justification, a good justification of why you hold that particular position. But you have to remember, YouTube is more than just us. And when you carry on a conversation with somebody and they don't have a decent justification for why they hold their position, they say, well, I'm an atheist. And then you ask them, well, what's your justification for? And they say, well, I don't have to give you one. Well, yeah, that's not how it works. Atheists do have a justification. If they're of course asserting that God does not exist, but I have a justification for why I'm an agnostic, right? I can meet that burden of why I feel I have the warrant to justify my position. But when I'm talking to somebody who says, Steve, you can't be an agnostic, there's no such position, you have to be theist or atheist, and they think I'm an idiot because I'm not thinking the way they are. That's what I run into, and it's the atheist leaders, or the I hate to say leaders because there's no leader of atheism, but the people in the limelight, the people with big channels, because my channel's small. I'm puny compared to all you guys, you know, except for maybe one person. I'm not going to call them out, but you know, you all have.
It's not about size, Steve.
It's about how you use it. About size. I don't care what the hell you've been told in your life. but when these bigger channels have put that out there, and I'm definitely not calling anybody out, but when I have seen videos where they say this, they're like, you know what, you can't be agnostic. You have to pick one or the other. And I'm just cringing because now I have a flood of people. I have so many people that do message me, and I have these conversations a lot. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, and I enjoy conversations. And they're telling me you can't do this. You can't be. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, I got wrapped up there. Sorry, bud.
That's okay. I have to go, so I just wanted to quickly answer. I do think that you can hold the agnostic position. I also believe it, not just from the definitions you guys have given, but also I remember what it was like when I wasn't sure myself. So I was very much like in the camp of I'm not sure, like I don't know, I have to look into this more, kind of thing. So at that point, I described myself as an agnostic, and I wasn't doing it because I wanted to fence sit or I didn't want to take a position. It was I genuinely didn't know. So I think you can hold that position. I would question why somebody would hold it once they've looked into it. Why, if you've had sufficient time to look into it, I would question why you would still be an agnostic. But that would be a whole separate conversation.
That's a different discussion, right?
Can I speak to something about that?
Sure.
There's a kind of elephant in the room here. Those of us who are atheists, we're all too familiar with people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who calls himself an agnostic and doesn't affirm that he's an atheist. Now, in fact, who knows what his position is, but it sounds to me like he's an atheist. But he's even said that he doesn't want to use the word atheist and self-identify as an atheist for political reasons, because it would be sort of injurious to his efforts as a science communicator, right? It would prejudice people against him. That's the concern that a lot of people have. A lot of atheists worry, look, there's a lot of people out there call themselves agnostics who we know in their heart of hearts think there's no gods, okay? But they're reluctant, owing to the stigma, to call themselves an atheist when they are an atheist. They don't just lack a belief; they actually think that there aren't any gods, right? So what are we to do about that? Well, what we've got to do is we've got to work to destigmatize the word. But we're not working to destigmatize the word when we tell everybody. Not everybody is Neil deGrasse Tyson. There are a lot of people out there who grew up with religion and fall out of their faith over the course of their lives. Okay. But they're not very confident that there's no God. In fact, they have no confidence that there's no God, nor do they have any confidence that there is a God. These are the people who are undecided, right? They may look into it and come to a conclusion, or not. They may never look into it, or they may look into it for years, deeply, deeply seriously, and still say, you know what, I still can't make up my mind. I know there are people telling them by now I should have made up my mind, but sucks to be them if they think that I need to make up my mind. People make up their minds when they make up their minds. In fact, we don't just decide what to believe. Our beliefs come to us. We believe rather helplessly and disbelieve rather helplessly. I didn't decide to become an atheist. I decided at some point to call myself an atheist. I didn't decide to be an atheist. It happened to me. At some point, I just stopped believing, and then I was an agnostic, and then I started thinking, Gods don't make any sense. There aren't any such things. Those are inventions. Okay. At that point, I realized I was an atheist, and I should start calling myself one. So the difficulty is that there are people who, in order to hide, because of the stigma from being called atheists, they call themselves agnostics. So there are atheists hiding among the agnostics. I think that is objectionable. I think it is quite objectionable what Neil deGrasse Tyson is doing. Right? If the shoe fits, wear it. But not every agnostic is like that. Like, there are just millions of people in the world who, grew up in a faith and believed it growing up, and then they tumble out of their faith, but they're still not confident one way or the other. And they are genuine agnostics. These are people genuinely who don't think either proposition is true, and they don't think either proposition is false. They know one of them is true and one of them is false. They don't know which, and they can't decide. They haven't made up their mind. And some people come to the conclusion that it's undecidable by anybody. Nobody has any business calling themselves theist or atheist. No one has any business saying God exists or God doesn't exist. Okay, so I think agnosticism is sort of, or agnostics, I should say, are sort of taking the heat. Right, honest agnostics are taking the heat for people who are hiding, who are afraid to come out as atheists, and people need to be encouraged to come out as atheists. But we're not going to achieve that by telling them, "I got news for you. All you agnostics are already atheists," because I think that's false to fact. There are a lot of people who are, in fact, really undecided. Right? The way to think of agnosticism, in my view, is not as knowledge or anything like that, but as simple indecision. Do you want to eat Chinese tonight, or do you want to go out for sushi, or do you want to go out for Italian? I don't know. I don't know there doesn't mean I lack justified true belief. I lack knowledge. It's just saying I'm undecided. I haven't made up my mind, or I can't make up my mind. That's how I see it.
All right. Thank you, Godless Cranium, for being here tonight. I know that you need to go and get some food, so why don't you go and do that?
Thanks, and thanks for having me on. It was fun.
Godless Cranium, 1 second. By the way, I loved our conversation the other day, and I hope we continue having those kind of dialogues. You were very, very amazing interactions. So thank you.
Thanks, man. That means a lot. All right. Thanks. Talk to you guys all later.
Cheers.
Yeah, see you later, man.
Cheers, chat.
Let's see. I know we're trying to wrap up here. So do we want to go one at a time to kind of give our final thoughts or whatnot on agnosticism and everything like that? I mean, I know that we've kind of been talking about that, but I didn't know if you guys had any final thoughts or whatnot. So just anybody that wants to go first, go first.
I think I've already said my last piece there. So thank you.
I'll give a final thought in a second. I'm kind of curious if. Thank you for hosting this hangout, and I think it's been wonderful. I think it's been informative. I think it's been educational. I think it's been helpful, and very productive. I'm kind of curious if it has. I don't want to say changed the minds of anybody, but has it influenced them? Has it weighed upon them that maybe what they've been hearing from some other atheist activists may not be exactly the correct per se? And I don't mean correct as in one position is better than another, but I mean that. Me putting forth that I'm a temporal agnostic is legit. I mean, so I just wonder if it's changed their position at all in regard to, you don't have to be a theist or be an atheist. There are other things out there. It's not a dichotomy between one and the other. It can be if you assign atheism as non-theism, which I think is honestly silly to do so for a variety of different reasons. I think it's non-productive to the atheist movement. I see it for political reasons, and I get that, but I don't think overall it really is a benefit, and I think that people are a little short-sighted on that, but that's a different story. But do you think anybody's kind of changed on it a little bit?
Do you want me to chime in on that?
No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, please. I very much so. I've always respected your opinion. So yes.
Well, based off your group chat message, I do see where you're coming from. It really hasn't. It hasn't completely changed the way that I see it in terms of Paul was holding up the chart of Gnostic versus agnostic and theist, and kind of like a graph, and I do think that your position can fall right in the middle there and not be leaning strongly towards one side or another. I do think that that's extremely rare. I think that most people who choose the label agnostic very oftentimes will lean one way or another. But while I know it's not the case for you, where, you know, you aren't taking a stance based off of stigma or based off of, you know, fear of losing a job or being disowned by family. I do know people where that's the case. I know a lot of people who use the word agnostic because it has a softer, less stigmatized connotation to it, and it, you know, saves them from a lot of the backlash that they would get from family otherwise. And so I position's extremely rare, but I also think that it's possible to be completely in the middle, and I'll give you that.
Yeah, well, not like dead center. There, like I said, there is a leeway either way a little bit, right? But towards the center, right? And yeah, and you're right though. But the fact that stigma remains, you made an excellent point right there. The fact that there is a stigma there, I think it does a little bit of disservice to people coming out of theology. And again, not everybody's like this. Some people go straight to atheism, but there are people that do transition and they go, "Hey, I'm not. I really don't believe anymore, but I don't want to call myself an atheist." And if you take that agnostic position away from them, right? And again, there's different types of reasons why they have agnosticism. It's not the same for me, but if you take that middle ground away, what are you telling them? You're saying, you know what, you have to either choose theism or atheism. If you're not an atheist, you're still a theist. And they're like, well, I might as well just stay theist then.
Well,
you're not giving them that
for those of us who are activists and, you know, who, you know, you say that your channel's small, you still have a voice. You have, you know, over 3,000 subscribers. You have people who tune in regularly, and you also have influence within the community itself of other influencers. And so for those of us who are activists, who are fighting up against this theological nonsense, against this massive power structure in the United States, this multi-billion-dollar you know, these multi-billion-dollar organizations and churches and whatnot, where we want to know which side of this intellectual tug of war you're pulling towards. You know, we want to know, are you just sitting completely in the middle? Are you an ally? Are you pulling just a tiny bit more for the theists or a tiny bit more for the atheists? You know, because we are fighting up against a lot of this. And when we hear that, you know, you're not a young earth creationist, you're pro-science, you're pro-critical thinking, then we see you as an ally on our side. And so I can see why a lot of people would identify you as a part of that camp, even though you don't see yourself there personally.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That is so important, what you just said. Of course, I associate with the atheist type community. I think we have the same goals in mind. Exactly what you said. There is a fight, but my fight isn't against religion. I'm not an anti-theist, right? And there people are in the atheist community. Some of them are anti-theist. Some of them are not, right? That's not my goal. But my goal is I want separation of church and state, right? I want the separate things. I don't want an encroachment on the school system. I want science to be taught. I think our goals overall are the same. And I think politically, that if people actually looked at the long term, I personally believe that the way I've been advocating is a better way to go. But of course, I'm not in politics, right? And other people might want to add to that if they feel the need to. But I am an ally, and I think what happens is that when hardcore militant atheists, and believe me, Holy Koolaid, there are a lot of them, more than you could probably realize. Just as many. If you find a militant theist, you're going to find a militant atheist, and they are the ones. And there are a lot more agnostics than probably you think, but they're the ones alienating the agnostics from the community. You know, from the movement that you have to have these things. They're like, if I say, look, I'm an agnostic, and a militant atheist says, no, Steve, you can't be an agnostic. I don't want to feel a part of that, right? I don't want to. I'm not an atheist. I don't label myself an atheist, but I might have the same goals that you have because I am an ally, definitely. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying.
Let's see. Paul, do you have any final thoughts?
I guess for me, my final thoughts, in terms of my channel and my goals and a lot of things, I'm battling against bad ideas. And, as far as I'm concerned, an agnostic is not adhering to the bad ideas that I'm fighting against. So that's partially why I kind of am willing to lump an agnostic together with me, because you're not holding the bad idea. And so, yeah, I'm sorry if the label that I kind of like to use isn't the label that you like to use, but in a way, I kind of just saying anything off of what Thomas was saying was that, I think when it's a fight against bad ideas, you're an ally, you're with us, and I'm sorry if we're lumping you together with an umbrella that's bigger than you want to be included under.
No, and I get that, and I actually agree with you a lot, and we're allies in that. Paulogia, we are totally allies. I am just as much against bad reasoning and young creationism and a lot of theological nonsense that I think is crap, right? If that's your goal, then I am like with you 100%, and right. I'm glad that you feel the same way. So, thank you.
Let's see. I don't know, Thomas. Did you give your final thoughts?
I mean, I've pretty much summed it up throughout, but basically, labels are labels. You know, for the same reason that I don't like identifying with, you know, identity politics, it's so easy to want to lump each other into boxes and to have one word that describes everything. But as long as we are, you know, I understand where David Silverman comes from, you know, where he wants to make our voting block bigger. He wants to show that, you know, there is a sizable opposition to separation of church and state. I still, whatever people call themselves, to me, my big thing is I want people to know why they believe something and to believe it on evidence, to be curious, to be, you know, critical thinkers. And ultimately, I think that will lead away from theism, because I think that theism is believing in things without evidence. Whether you fall right in the middle or, you know, with a little bit of wiggle room and identify as agnostic or atheist, as long as we're fighting the same fight, you know, welcome aboard.
I thank you. I agree.
And as far as my final comments or whatnot, like, I'm not really, I know earlier it might have sounded like I want to build up that voting block and be represented more, but mainly I'm trying to argue for, you know, the fact that you don't have to be afraid to call yourself an atheist if that's what you want to call yourself, because I feel like this conversation gets misconstrued as to saying that, you know, like you should, like you, it would be better for you to call yourself this because of this definition of that. And like, I don't know, for me, I like to advocate for, you know, people not being ashamed of calling themselves an atheist. And just because you call yourself an atheist doesn't mean that you have knowledge, you know, of God not existing or anything like that. That's why I try to emphasize, you know, the belief aspect. It's like, I believe that God doesn't exist. And I feel like that particular part, the belief aspect of atheism, kind of gets lost in you know, communication that is being had online. And so that's just kind of my view of it. I feel like that part gets lost, and that in my experience, just like Steve has his experience, in my anecdotal experience, whenever I mention agnostic atheism or you know, the agnostic and whatnot, I'm the one that gets a lot of blowback from people saying, no, that's not right. You're wrong. So I mean, I could totally sympathize with you know, espousing your beliefs or whatnot, and somebody telling you, no, you're wrong about that. But I feel like that particular dynamic is where a lot of this conversation starts, and why it is a conversation, because you'll assert, you know, that you're an agnostic atheist, and then you get some asshole that's like, oh, you can't be both those things. Mm-mm. And they try to push that on you, trying to tell you what you believe. And like, I totally feel that like Steve and everybody that considers himself an agnostic or temporal agnostic, I consider them allies, and I think that we're all fighting for the same thing. It's just that in a lot of communication, a lot of things get lost. And so I just don't want it to seem like I don't consider you guys like an ally or whatnot, or that we're not kind of part of the same driving force in some aspects. So I mean, that's what I wanted to be specific on for my little last bit here. So
no, thank you.
I want to thank you.
Oh,
good.
There.
Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I heard an echo. It doesn't echo. I don't know what's from. Yeah, no, but thank you for hosting this, Godless Engineer. Very awesome conversation, very productive, and I really appreciate that you taking your time to host this and have people watch it. And I hope a lot of people at least learn something. They don't have to agree with me, right? I hope they just understand it. That's all. That's the best I can hope for somebody who disagrees with me. They at least understand that I'm not unreasonable from formulating my beliefs and why I hold this. And then I am your guys' ally, obviously. I love you guys.
Yeah.
We love you, Steve.
Well, we love you too, Steve.
Don't hug me though.
I can share some of the things that Steve has said to me in private. But...
Oh yeah, well we won't go there.
I don't know that I love everybody here. I don't know that I love anybody here. In fact, I know I don't love anybody here. But I have loved this conversation. So thank you, Godless Engineer, for hosting this. This was nice. This was really nice because there was genuine disagreement here. This was a really spirited disagreement where people were getting frustrated and annoyed with each other, and we got to explore a lot of possibilities, and we got to explore not only this topic but the value of the topic. Right? We kind of had a meta discussion at the same time. So thank you very much. This was fun. Thank you.
Very fun.
No, yeah, I hope that I can host another one of these things maybe next month or something like that. I don't know. I'll probably get with Steve and see what we argue about next time. And I'm glad that all. Go ahead.
I said I'm sure we'll find something.
Artificial intelligence, is it a good idea or not?
I'll settle for natural intelligence.
Yeah,
no shit, right?
Well, I know most of the links are in the description. I'll be sure to add anybody that wasn't in there to begin with afterwards. So, but everybody should go and subscribe to these guys. They're all really awesome. Except Ozzy and Nicola. I don't know if you guys have really a YouTube channel. But I appreciate. Yeah. Okay.
Presently, not really. My YouTube channel has ceased to exist.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you came here because of one of the rest of us, subscribe to GE.
Yeah, well, I hope everybody is already subscribed. God, why aren't you guys already subscribed?
And why are there more likes? Everybody watching, you have to like the video. That's kind of a requirement.
Yeah, there's 45 people watching right now and only 32 likes. So let's get that number up a little bit. See if we can at least break 40.
Smash that like button. Anyways,
I'm a bit of a hypocrite. I just now liked it.
Oh my! See, that's the first thing I did before I got in here. I liked it before I even started. I just assumed it was going to go well.
Anyways, I really appreciate you guys joining us today. Especially the people in the chat here. And I guess you heathens better have a great week. And I'll see you on the channel.